my husband said. That fat woman embarrasses me. It wasn't just a cruel sentence, it was a dagger that shattered years of silence. Imagine this, the very person you trusted with your life, the one you built everything around, turns and destroys your dignity with just a few careless words. Shocking, isn't it? But this is the truth. This story isn't just about insult. It's about betrayal, a battle for respect, and a silent revenge that changed everything. One sentence, one night, and the woman who had always been quiet was about to take a step no one could have ever imagined. But remember, the real secret wasn't what her husband said. The real secret was what she was hiding in her heart all along. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you'll uncover the shocking truth that turned her entire world upside down. He thought she didn't hear him. But silence is never proof of deafness. It is proof of wounds too deep to show. That morning, the grand house smelled of fresh lilies and expensive perfume. Sunlight filtered through the glass walls, bouncing off silver trays and golden picture frames. She had prepared everything with care, his favorite breakfast, a neatly wrapped gift, even the smile she had rehearsed in the mirror. For 10 years, this was the role she played, a wife who looked perfect, spoke softly, and never complained. She had learned to swallow her pain with the same elegance she swallowed her wine at charity dinners. And yet, all it took was one sentence. One careless, cruel sentence that shattered every mask she had ever worn. That fat woman embarrasses me. The words slipped from his lips like poison. He was in the study with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking to someone who laughed along with him. He thought the door was closed. He thought she was still upstairs. But she was there, just a few feet away, frozen in place, every syllable carving itself into her chest. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. Her hands trembled, the silver tray nearly slipping from her grip. But she caught it, steadied herself, and forced her face into stone. Because that was what she had been trained to do. Hide the storm, hide the truth. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked away as if nothing had happened, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. But inside, something had cracked, something that had been breaking slowly for years and finally refused to be silent anymore. All her life, people had told her she was lucky. Lucky to marry into wealth. Lucky to live in a mansion. Lucky to wear diamonds and attend galas where cameras flashed like fireworks. But luck, she realized, could also be a curse. Because behind those golden walls, she was nothing but a shadow, mocked, belittled, invisible. A trophy wife polished for display, but never truly loved. That day, she looked at herself in the mirror longer than usual. She traced the lines around her eyes, the softness of her body, the face that once dreamed of love but now carried only silence. And for the first time, she didn't see weakness staring back. She saw a woman standing at the edge of something dangerous, something powerful. He thought she didn't hear him, but she had heard every word. And though she stayed quiet, though she acted as if she hadn't noticed, her silence wasn't surrender, it was planning. That night, she smiled at him across the dinner table. She poured his wine, complimented his jokes, and gave him the gift she had bought weeks earlier. He never suspected a thing. To him, she was still the obedient, docile woman who would never fight back. But beneath that smile, her heart was already writing its escape. Every fork, every laugh, every word exchanged at that table was a mask. Inside, she repeated a single promise to herself: this ends soon. Tomorrow begins a new story. And tomorrow, he would discover that the woman he thought was too weak to fight back was the very woman who would dismantle his perfect little world. Because silence, when broken, doesn't whisper. It roars. The next morning began like any other. He walked down the grand staircase in his tailored suit, his polished shoes tapping against the marble, every movement dripping with arrogance. To the world, he was flawless, a man of status, charisma, and ambition. To her, he was something far darker, a man who wore charm as a mask, while behind closed doors he sharpened cruelty into a weapon. She followed him with her eyes, her face calm, her lips curved in a gentle smile. But her heart was burning, each beat echoing the words she could not forget. That fat woman embarrasses me. He didn't notice her silence. Why would he? For years, he had been blind to her pain, deaf to her dignity. He believed her silence was weakness. He believed her love, or what he thought was love, would chain her forever. But what he didn't know was that silence is not the absence of strength. Silence is the gathering of storms. Later that day, she overheard him again, this time not just a careless insult, but a confession that cut deeper than any wound. Hidden by the doorframe, she listened as he spoke to his closest confidant. His words weren't just cruel, they were calculating. I only married her for her money. Do you really think I care about her? She's nothing but a stepping stone. Once I secure everything, she'll be gone. I'll make sure of it. The man on the other end laughed coldly, encouraging him. Together, they mocked her, her weight, her smile, her kindness, as if those were flaws instead of the very things that made her human. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she didn't move. She stayed hidden in the shadows, her hands gripping the wall to keep from collapsing. Each word was a knife, slicing through every memory, every promise, every illusion of love she had once believed in. But she didn't interrupt. She didn't storm into the room. She didn't reveal herself. She simply walked away, silently, gracefully, as though nothing had happened. But inside, she had already begun writing her revenge, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, patience. That evening, as they dined together under the glow of crystal chandeliers, he smiled at her with the same polished grin he showed the cameras. He spoke of his plans, his ambitions, his rise to power. She nodded, pretending to be the perfect wife at his side. But behind her steady gaze, her mind was miles away, calculating, observing, preparing. Every laugh he faked, every toast he raised, every smug glance he gave was another stone added to the fire she was quietly building. He thought she didn't know. He thought his betrayal was safe, hidden behind closed doors and whispered conversations. But she knew. And knowledge is the most dangerous weapon of all. That night, as he fell asleep without a care, she stood at the window, staring at the moonlight breaking through the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, and for the first time in years, she recognized the woman in the mirror. Not the obedient wife, not the silent shadow, but someone stronger, someone ready to rise. She whispered to herself, so softly the words dissolved into the night air. You betrayed me once, but I will betray your expectations forever. And with that vow, her plan silently took root. A plan that would not only change her life, but also expose him in a way he could never recover from. Because betrayal, once uncovered, doesn't just destroy love, it destroys legacies. The house looked the same, but she no longer felt like its prisoner. The polished marble floors, the expensive chandeliers, the art he displayed for guests, it had once been her pride, but now it felt like a museum of lies. Every wall, every golden frame seemed to whisper the same truth. You don't belong here. You were never loved here. She carried herself with poise, just as she always had, but behind her calm eyes, something had shifted. The betrayal hadn't broken her, it had awakened her. For years, she had lived by his rules. She had smiled when he smiled, laughed when he demanded it, stayed silent when he cut her down. But now she replayed his words, I only married her for her money, and each time, her silence grew less like surrender and more like strategy. That night, she stood before the mirror again. The woman looking back at her wasn't the broken wife he thought she was. Her eyes no longer begged for love, they calculated. Her lips no longer trembled with fear, they curled into the faintest smile of defiance. She realized then that she held the one power he could never take, knowledge. And with that knowledge, she began to plan. The first step was small, invisible. She began gathering documents, bank accounts, deeds, legal papers, all of which he assumed she was too naive to understand. But she knew. For years, she had quietly observed, quietly learned, quietly memorized every detail of his empire. He thought she was blind to it all, but she had been storing every secret like weapons hidden in plain sight. During the day, she played her part perfectly. She poured his coffee with a smile, nodded at his endless speeches, and let him believe he was in control. He walked through the house with arrogance, never realizing that the ground beneath him was already beginning to crack. But at night, when the house was quiet, she transformed. The sound of typing filled her study as she opened accounts in her own name, ones he could never touch. She made discreet calls to people he didn't even know existed. Lawyers, advisors, a broker she had once helped in silence who now owed her a favor. Piece by piece, she was building a path out, invisible to his arrogant eyes. And yet, the most dangerous part wasn't the money or the papers, it was her silence. He still believed she hadn't heard. He still believed she was too weak, too blind, too desperate to ever leave him. That ignorance was her shield, and she wore it well. There were moments, late at night, when her courage faltered. She would clutch a photograph of herself before the marriage, young, hopeful, free, and wonder if she was truly strong enough to return to that woman. Fear whispered in her ear, "What if he finds out? What if he destroys you before you escape?" But then she remembered his words, cruel and sharp, "That fat woman embarrasses me." And with every echo of that insult, her fear hardened into determination. She wasn't leaving out of weakness. She was leaving out of strength. And when she did, it wouldn't just be a quiet escape. It would be a reckoning. In the stillness of her bedroom, she whispered her vow again, stronger this time. Tomorrow, everything begins to change. And with that, her silent decision became her greatest weapon. Because when a woman who has been silenced for years finally decides to act, the world will never see it coming. The hours before dawn always felt quieter in that house, like the walls were holding their breath. Tonight, they seemed to listen. The chandeliers slept in the dark, the long hallway mirrors reflected nothing but thin slices of moonlight, and the clocks ticked like distant footsteps. He was upstairs, asleep in the master suite, confident in the script he thought he'd written for both of their lives. The confidence of a man who mistakes silence for surrender. She moved through the hallway with the practiced grace of a hostess, though tonight there were no guests to impress, only decisions to honor. On the console table lay a box of personalized stationery she'd ordered months ago. She slid out a single card. The paper was heavy, the kind designers call heritage cotton. It felt ceremonial, like a small, white oath in her hands. She uncapped a pen and wrote slowly, the way one writes a truth they've rehearsed only in their chest. "Thank you for showing your true colors." No explanation, no scene, no storm. He liked performances. She chose evidence. She blew lightly across the ink and set the card where he would find it with the morning light, right next to the bowl where he tossed his keys, the way one places a mirror exactly where it hurts most. Her bag sat open on the dining chair. She did not pack as if she were running. She packed as if she were choosing. Passport. An old driver's license from before the marriage, tucked behind a photograph of herself at 18, barefoot on a windy pier, hair wild, face clean of performance. A small notebook with a ribbon marker, half prayer, half ledger. A plain, dark coat that swallowed her figure rather than announce it. 2 changes of clothes, each practical enough to be invisible. She reached for the jewelry box and hesitated. It wasn't the diamonds that tempted her, it was the meanings she'd pinned to them to survive. Anniversary bracelets turned apologies, cocktail rings turned conversation armor. She sifted until she found a thin, scratched band her father had given her when she got her first job, long before anyone measured her by a last name. She slipped that one on. Everything else, she left. Even the wedding ring. Especially the wedding ring. In the study, the dim screen of her laptop pulsed like a lighthouse. She'd already done the quiet work. Months of small moves disguised as routine. Passwords rotated. Secondary accounts opened. Autopays rerouted. The property trust nodded through a clause he never bothered to read. The charity board seat she'd stepped back from now held a silent line of credit with her signature alone. She wasn't taking what wasn't hers. She was reclaiming what had always been placed on her wrist like a leash and called love. A single email remained, drafted and waiting. Subject: Administrative Update. She smiled at the title. The body contained 2 sentences and a document attachment. Legal, clean, final. Not a threat, not a confession. A key turned from the inside. She pressed send. On the mantel, a framed photo of the 2 of them at a gala caught the blue light from the screen. He in tuxedo, she in scarlet. Camera-ready happiness. She tipped the frame face down, then unplugged the laptop and slipped it into her bag. The house had a way of amplifying memories when it wanted to trap her. The scent of lily arrangements. The polite laughter of guests. The quick glances at her plate when she didn't order the smallest thing on the menu. Even kindness, here, had been rehearsed. She paused at the piano, a glossy monument she was never invited to play because he said the sight of sheet music made the room look messy. Tonight, she ran a fingertip along the keys. No sound. Not yet. She checked the front door, then didn't take it. She took the door that never appears in photographs, the service entry that opens into a narrow corridor smelling faintly of lemons and old wood. This door had always been for deliveries, for other people's labor. She pressed her palm against the cool brass and understood the symbolism so thoroughly it made her smile. She would exit this life through the only honest door it had. Outside, the air was damp and loyal. The hedges were trimmed into obedient shapes, the gravel raked into clean lines. Her shoes remembered how to be quiet. She followed the shadowed path along the side of the house, moving past the bay window of his office. A ledger lay open on the desk. A row of cuff links, identical, gleamed like tiny medals. She kept walking. At the gate, she stopped, not because she doubted, but because ritual matters when you're changing your life. She removed the wedding ring and held it up to the streetlight. It looked expensive and tired. "You do not define me," she said, softly, not for the night to hear but for her throat to learn, and slipped it through the narrow gap in the ironwork. It fell into the dark ivy with the small sound of something unimportant. She'd chosen cash over spectacle. A ride-share called to the corner 2 streets away, under a name that once belonged to no one but her. When the car arrived, the driver didn't look at her twice. Perfect. She sat in the back with her bag hugged close, eyes forward. The city slid by in sheets of wet asphalt and blinking signals. Halfway there, a notification flickered across the old phone she'd kept only for this moment. Administrative update, complete. She exhaled. The last tether loosened. The station was Mercy. Fluorescent, anonymous, indifferent. She bought a paper ticket because paper leaves fewer echoes and sat on a hard bench among people whose lives were running parallel to hers without touching. A woman with a sleeping child slumped against her shoulder and murmured an apology. She shook her head and adjusted so the child could rest. Across the aisle, a man in a paint-stained jacket counted small bills with reverence. Language shifted around her. Accents, slang, the music of people moving because they must. It felt like being returned to an ocean after years in a glass bowl. She went to the restroom and did something practical and irreversible. She cut her hair to the length in the 18-year-old photo. No drama, no gasps, just quiet snips into a paper towel that left her scalp light and her face newly legible to herself. She swapped the tailored coat for the plain one, the heels for shoes that knew how to run without hurting. When she looked up, there was no miracle. There was only a woman who'd remembered how to recognize the person in the mirror. On the platform, the train yawned open with a sigh. She chose a seat by the window near the end of the car, back to the door out of habit. The city receded in a low hum, then in a roll, then in a ribbon of lights stitched into darkness. She pressed her palm to the glass and felt the vibration of forward. A laugh, her own, surprised her. Not the polite version she'd used to fill rooms, but a quiet, delighted breath at the feeling of motion that belonged to her. Somewhere between stations, the conductor announced a delay, the car lights flickered, and for a beat the world reassembled itself as a test. Her chest tightened, then released. She opened the notebook and wrote a sentence without editing it. Dignity is not given, it's reclaimed. On the next line she added, fear will not be the author. She underlined author. Human value, she thought, isn't in what you own, but in what you refuse to trade away to be accepted. Upstairs in the house she'd left, an alarm would go off in an hour. He would reach for his robe. He would descend the staircase that made him feel like royalty. He would see the note. There would be anger first, of course, then calls. Then the slow comprehension that a story he believed he controlled had already been edited in permanent ink. She did not need to imagine his reaction to feel strong. She only needed to stay faithful to her next step. The train pulled into a junction and idled. A few passengers rose. A few others boarded. A teen with a backpack slid into the seat across from her and started sketching in a dog-eared pad, eyes quick and kind. You traveling far? He asked, not prying, just trying on adulthood. Far enough to start fresh, she said. Simple. True. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. He turned his sketchbook so she could see, not her face, not a portrait, just a doorway drawn in confident lines, open to a road. It made her want to cry for reasons that weren't sad. Keep it, he said, tearing the page out and handing it to her. Looks like you need it. Thank you, she managed, and slid the drawing into her notebook like a promise. When the train lurched forward again, she noticed a small headline on the forgotten newspaper jammed into the seat pocket, a financial column about public filings, quiet transfers, names she recognized. The words didn't frighten her, they clarified her clock. She had left not a moment too soon. Freedom is often a matter of minutes. Near dawn, thin light stitched the horizon. Her phone, now the new one, buzzed once with a message from the lawyer. Document recorded. You're clear. Safe travels. She typed received. Thank you, then powered the phone down and watched the countryside roll by in soft, forgiving grays. The car was warm. The window hummed. Her eyes finally closed, not from exhaustion but from the absence of vigilance. The PA crackled with the name of a town she'd chosen for its humility, the kind of place where people ask what you can do, not what you're worth. She gathered her bag, smoothed her coat, and stood. The doors parted with a breath. On the platform, the air tasted like rain and bakery ovens. A handwritten sign tacked to a corkboard near the exit said, "Rooms available. No questions." She almost laughed. The universe can be plain-spoken when it wants you to move. She took a step toward it and felt the lightness that comes when the page turns and the sentence has already begun. Then a voice behind her, low, surprised, almost familiar, said her birth name. Not the married one. The one from the photograph. The one she thought no one here could possibly know. She did not turn yet. She steadied her breathing, set her shoulders, and lifted her chin. Freedom requires courage at the doorframe. She turned slowly, ready to learn whether the past had arrived to drag her back or to hand her the next key. The town she stepped into wasn't made of marble or gold. It was a place that wore its struggles openly, chipped paint on the storefronts, tired benches that had held too many conversations, sidewalks cracked by winters that never apologized. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her feet was honest. No chandeliers here, no photographs staged for society magazines, just life, raw and unpolished. She walked past a bakery where the smell of bread clung to the air like an embrace, past children darting through puddles with laughter too loud to be rehearsed. For once, no one turned to whisper her name. No one measured her dress, her body, her smile. Here, she was invisible. And invisibility, which once felt like a punishment in her marriage, now felt like freedom. At a corkboard near the bus stop, a handwritten sign caught her attention. Room for rent. No questions asked. The words felt like a door opening. She knocked timidly on the listed address, and a woman in her 60s answered, eyes sharp, hands calloused from years of work, a voice that carried caution. "Looking for something?" the woman asked. "A room," she replied, steady but soft. "Just for a while." The woman's gaze scanned her carefully. She didn't fit here. Her skin was too well kept, her posture too straight. But the stranger didn't press, only nodded. "Cash only. No trouble." "No trouble," she promised, handing over an envelope of bills she'd withdrawn in the city. The room was small, bare walls stained with dampness, a bed that creaked when she sat on it, a window that rattled in the wind. And yet, when she closed the door behind her, she felt safer in that cracked little room than in all the wealth she had abandoned. This wasn't a cage. This was a beginning. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories pulled at her, his voice dripping with contempt, the laughter of his mother, the emptiness of a marriage that had been built on chains. But instead of tears, she felt clarity. She wasn't running anymore. She was building. The next morning, she wandered the neighborhood. She introduced herself with a name that wasn't her husband's, wasn't her family's, wasn't tied to shame or insult. A name she chose, light, unburdened, almost reborn. People accepted it without question. They didn't ask where she came from. They only asked, "What can you do?" And that was the question she had longed to hear. She stumbled upon a community clinic, peeling paint, overcrowded waiting room, a staff stretched thin but still refusing to turn anyone away. She watched a young doctor, eyes tired but voice steady, reassure a mother who couldn't afford the medicine her child needed. His words weren't wrapped in arrogance. They were wrapped in care. Something inside her stirred. She had never held a stethoscope, but she knew how to organize, how to manage, how to steady chaos. She stepped forward, surprising even herself. "Do you need help?" she asked. The doctor glanced at her, skeptical at first. But then he saw something in her eyes, something that didn't quite match her story, but carried a weight he recognized. He extended his hand. "We always need help." And just like that, she began. Her hands, which had once been used to hold crystal glasses at charity dinners, now folded sheets, organized supplies, carried boxes. Her evenings were filled not with rehearsed laughter but with real exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing something that matters. No one asked who she used to be. They only cared who she was now. In the cracks of this new life, she found something she thought she had lost forever: connection. A little girl with solemn eyes clung to her as if she'd been waiting for her all along. The child smiled with the fragile light of someone who had already known too much pain, and in that smile, she felt her own heart begin to heal. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by her weight, her silence, her husband's scorn. She was defined by her choice to stand, to help, to matter. At night, when the clinic closed and the streets quieted, she would sit by the cracked window of her rented room, notebook in her lap. She wrote the words she wanted to live by now. I was never invisible. I was only surrounded by people who chose not to see. But the past isn't an easy ghost to bury. And even as she built this new version of herself, a shadow lingered at the edges of her mind. She knew it was only a matter of time before the man she had left behind discovered her absence. And when he did, would her new life be strong enough to withstand his rage? For weeks, she lived like a ghost who had finally chosen her own haunting ground. She worked at the clinic, folded sheets, counted medicine bottles, and learned to smile without checking if someone was watching. Children began to wave at her in the streets. Women nodded at her with the quiet acknowledgement reserved for survivors. She had built a fragile but real rhythm, each day stretching further from the gilded cage she had escaped. But freedom is never unchallenged. The past has its own stubborn heartbeat. It began subtly. A news anchor's voice on a broken TV in the waiting room. Rising political figure Marcus Sterling faces growing questions about his wife's sudden disappearance. The headline scrolled across the screen. Mansion sold in secret.
Funds vanish.
Her hand froze on the clipboard she was holding. Her throat went dry. The room spun for a moment, though no one else seemed to notice. She set the clipboard down carefully, steadying her breath. He was looking for her. The second warning came as whispers. A volunteer at the clinic mentioned a black SUV parked at the edge of town, engine running, the kind of car that didn't belong among cracked sidewalks and corner food trucks. She pretended not to hear, but her pulse quickened. The third warning wasn't subtle. One evening, as she walked back from buying gauze, she saw it, the car. Black, polished, windows tinted too dark, parked directly across from the clinic door. She stopped mid-step. For a second, her body betrayed her, her chest locked, her feet wanted to flee, her throat wanted to scream. She forced herself to breathe. Slowly, she turned away, her pace calm but her heartbeat frantic, each step measured like the rhythm of someone hiding the fact that they're running. She ducked into alleys, changed her path, counted the blocks like a prayer. When she finally looked back, the car was gone. But she knew now. He was close. Too close. That night, she couldn't sleep. The fan rattled above her head, the damp walls pressed in, and every sound outside felt like footsteps. She sat by the window with her notebook open, the words trembling onto the page. He will find me. The question is, will I still be the woman who runs, or the woman who stands? At the clinic the next day, the little girl she had grown close to pressed a bracelet of red thread into her palm. "So you won't leave me," the child whispered. Her eyes, innocent yet knowing, pierced straight into the woman's soul. She clasped the bracelet on her wrist, holding back tears. "I won't leave," she said. But in her heart, she wondered, could she keep that promise if the past broke through her new walls? Meanwhile, far away, Marcus Sterling's empire was beginning to crack. His campaign faltered. Donors whispered. Journalists dug deeper. The mansion sale, the missing wife, the accounts that no longer answered to him, it was all fuel for suspicion. He raged in private, shattering glasses against walls, barking orders at the investigator he had hired. "Find her," he growled. "I don't care how. Bring her back before everything burns." The investigator, a tired man with military precision in his eyes, already had trails. A bus ticket here, a bank withdrawal there, a blurry photo of a woman whose hair was shorter now, whose shoulders carried a new kind of defiance. It was only a matter of time. Back in her small rented room, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She touched the red thread bracelet, then the photograph of her younger self. The name she had chosen, her shield, her disguise, suddenly felt thinner, more fragile. How long before it split open? How long before the world called her by the name she had abandoned? The past wasn't knocking anymore. It was standing on the doorstep. And the question wasn't if he would find her. The question was whether, when he did, she would finally stand as the woman she had become, or collapse back into the prison she had once fled. The day the past finally arrived was not with thunder, but with a silence so sharp it felt like glass breaking. She was returning from the market, a bag of bread pressed against her chest, when she saw it again, the black SUV. Only this time, it wasn't parked on a distant street. It was right there, at the edge of the clinic's courtyard, its tinted windows swallowing the light. Her steps faltered. The bracelet of red thread dug into her wrist as if to remind her, "You promised you wouldn't run." She inhaled deeply, her eyes fixed not on the car, but on the clinic door behind it. Inside were people who depended on her. A little girl who had tied her heart to hers. A man who believed in her more than she believed in herself. To flee now would be to vanish again, not just from him, but from herself. The door to the SUV opened. And he stepped out. Marcus Sterling. Once polished like marble, now worn at the edges. His suit hung a little looser, his eyes shadowed not by power but by desperation. Yet his presence still carried the arrogance of someone who thought the world owed him obedience. He held a briefcase, but his face held something sharper than steel, a need to regain control. She didn't move. She let him walk closer, the distance shrinking like the years between who she was and who she had become. When he stopped a few feet away, the air itself seemed to thicken. "I didn't come to fight," he said quickly, as if rehearsed. "I came to make a deal." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into a knowing line. "There are no deals with you." He opened the briefcase, revealing papers, documents, fragments of the life they once shared. "I could destroy you with this. I could claim you stole, faked your disappearance, ruined everything." Her voice was steady. "Do it. Say whatever you want. I already took everything from you, but not what you think." He blinked, confused. "I took back my dignity," she continued, her tone calm but sharp enough to cut. "You have power, yes. Money, perhaps. But you will never have peace. And without peace, all the wealth in the world is a cage." His face crumpled, not into remorse, but into something emptier, defeat. For the first time, he looked older than his years. A man whose empire had rotted from the inside, who now stood on the ashes of his illusions. She stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. "Tell your mother I heard her silence. Tell her I forgive her for what she did to herself, not for what she allowed you to do to me. And as for you," she paused, letting the weight of her words hang, "we are no longer enemies. We are nothing." Before he could reply, she placed an envelope in his briefcase. He glanced at it, confused, but didn't open it until later, alone in some sterile hotel room. Inside, a single letter in her handwriting. "Power without love is hollow. Money without soul is death. You killed me many times while I was alive, but I resurrected. And you are still buried in your own ego. Learn to be alone. Only then will you begin to find yourself." Back in the clinic, she exhaled, her body trembling but her spirit unbroken. Elijah, the doctor who had become her confidant, met her at the door. He said nothing, only placed his hand over hers, the red thread bracelet between their palms. She finally allowed herself to lean into someone without fear of falling. In the weeks that followed, the SUV never returned. Marcus's face appeared on television not as a leader but as a cautionary tale: corruption, fraud, betrayal. His empire crumbled like a castle of sand, while hers, built on truth, compassion, and dignity, began to rise. The foundation she created in the old abandoned warehouse became a sanctuary. Women arrived carrying their own scars, children came with wide, frightened eyes, and men and women alike found healing within its walls. On the opening day, the ribbon was cut not by her, but by the little girl who had once given her the bracelet of red thread. Cameras weren't invited, only witnesses who mattered. She knew her time was limited. Her body carried an illness she could not escape, but instead of fearing it, she chose to pour the last of her strength into something greater than herself. When her hands could no longer lift boxes, they wrote letters. When her voice grew weak, she whispered lessons. And when her days drew shorter, she smiled. Not the smile of pretense, but the smile of a woman who had finally lived on her own terms. When she passed, it was not in a marble crypt or under chandeliers, but quietly in her small room above the foundation, sunlight warming her face, the red bracelet still around her wrist. There was no press, no spectacle, only love. Her ashes were scattered in the garden of the foundation, under a young almond tree planted by the children. And in that soil, her story grew roots. The book she left behind, pages of her journey, her pain, her rebirth, was discovered weeks later and published. It spread not because of marketing campaigns, but because women whispered it to one another, handed it from hand to hand, until it became more than a story. It became a mirror in which thousands saw their own strength reflected. Her name was no longer tied to scandal, to shame, or to insult. It was tied to dignity, to freedom, to truth. And on the foundation's main wall, painted in bright colors by the hands of children, were her words. The world finally knew her not as the woman who embarrassed her husband, but as the woman who taught others never to be embarrassed of who they are. Because in the end, her greatest revenge was not leaving him. It was teaching the world that no one, no matter how cruel, could ever define her worth again. Her story reminds us of one unshakable truth. Dignity is not given, it is reclaimed. Sparkles. If you believe every woman deserves respect, hit that like button right now. Speech balloons, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and what dignity means to you. Pushpin, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we bring you another powerful story that will open your eyes in ways you never expected. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.